In 2020, Democrats took full control of Washington.
And it will give Democrats control of the Senate.
Joe Biden has been elected.
But Republicans stood up in the states.
There was no blue wave. Democratic down-ballot disasters carried all the way to the state legislatures.
Now, we're the last line of defense against the Democrats' socialist agenda. The ways we're fighting back are bigger than you think.
Hello, I'm your host, Annie Moore, and welcome back to It's Bigger Than You Think. We're on episode 22. Having conversations about the politics that most impact our daily lives. So this past week, RSLC, we released our top targets for the midterms, which we're obviously super excited about. And our top two chamber flip opportunities for this year are the Minnesota House and the Colorado Senate. So today we're going to be talking with John Rouleau with the Minnesota Jobs Coalition and Daniel Cole with the Colorado Senate Majority Fund to kind of discuss what they're seeing on the ground and where they see the most opportunity for GOP success in November. So Daniel, John, appreciate you guys being on here.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate you, Andy. Thank you.
Okay, so can you both kind of talk about your roles with your respective organizations, and so people kind of have a background for, you know, where your perspectives are coming from?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having us. My name's John, and like Annie said, I am with an organization called the Minnesota Jobs Coalition. That's our 501c4. We do issue advocacy, a lot of educational work out of that. And then we also have a state-level independent expenditure political committee that focuses on state-level races in Minnesota. And we've been really excited to be a partner of RSLC's going back to 2014. So looking forward to having a conversation about state races.
Thanks, Annie. Really glad to be here. Really glad to be on your list of targeted flips. My name is Daniel Cole. I am general consultant to Senate Majority Fund in Colorado. That's the independent expenditure committee dedicated to flipping state Senate seats. I'm a political operative. I work for the House IEC also, that's called Restore Colorado Leadership Fund, and do other IEC work. For instance, in the November 21 election, ran an effort targeting school board seats and ended up winning 9 out of 9. So that was a great success, and we hope to replicate it in November of 22 in the state Senate races.
That's super exciting. Love that. School boards are hot right now. So, okay, so we're going to start with Minnesota. John, Republicans control the Senate by just 1 seat, but Democrats control the House. Why do you think that there's a chance to flip the House this year?
So in Minnesota, we've got a couple of things that are coming, looking like they're going our direction right now. We've got the historic trends in Minnesota where we see the chambers flip back and forth, and actually going back for about a decade, they really flipped just about every other cycle. We broke that trend in 2016 when we expanded our majority after flipping it in 2014. But what we see is that, you know, in Minnesota, there's a lot of kind of independents, voters in the middle. They don't want anybody who's too extreme. They want somebody who's a check on, you know, what's going on in Washington, check on the Biden agenda. Joe Biden's incredibly unpopular here right now. And beyond that, coming out of redistricting in Minnesota, we had a really interesting redistricting cycle this year. So our legislature is tasked with writing maps, but because we're one of the few states in the country that has a divided legislature, our maps didn't get signed into law. Actually, I don't believe either of the chambers even passed maps, so it fell to the courts. And we got what I would call good, fair maps. So in a good political environment, those look like a lot of opportunities. And I think the Democrats know it, right? You know, we had on our top list of target races, 6 of those incumbent Democrats have already decided that they want to retire instead of lose. So that's our message, is that they can retire, or they can lose. And we're going to be focused on flipping the House in November.
Retire or lose. I love that. So, okay, so if Republicans are in control of both chambers in Minnesota, what kind of positive change do you think will be brought to the state?
Yeah, I think as one of those states that has the divided legislature, our Senate and our friends in the Senate have really been focused on playing a lot of defense for us. We've got Governor Walz and the Democrats in the House who are pushing really just terrible policies, right? You know, they As you look at prices at the gas pump, over the last 3 years, Minnesota Democrats have suggested that we raise the gas tax by 25 cents, billions of dollars in taxes that would make gas even more expensive. Our friends in the Senate were able to block that. So when they've been playing defense, we really haven't been able to do a lot of things that we can do when we have both of those majorities to make improvements in people's lives. So things haven't been getting, we haven't been allowing policies to get through that make their lives worse, but we haven't been able to do things to help Minnesotans, help the business community, get our economy back on track. And then we also are staring down the barrel of a nearly $10 billion budget surplus, which is a little bit different for Minnesota. We've got a fully funded budget reserve, but we've got about $10 billion sitting that the government overtaxed Minnesotans on. And we need to figure out how to get that money back into the pockets of Minnesotans, start to take a look at some structural tax reform that we can do, and make sure that we make Minnesota a better place to live, raise a family, do business.
That's awesome. All right, cool. So we're just going to pivot to Colorado. Daniel, I'm going to ask you pretty much the same questions. But in Colorado, Republicans don't control either state legislative chamber and have been entirely shut out of statewide representation as well. So why do you think that there's a chance to flip the Senate chamber red in November?
So a couple major factors here. One is that I think Colorado is more center-right than it would look if you were only looking at the partisan makeup of our various branches of government. We have a lot of initiatives and referenda in Colorado, initiatives in particular, and it's frequently commented that the voters, when it comes to issues, when it comes to initiatives on the ballot before them, vote like Republicans, but they've been rejecting Republicans in recent years. We controlled the state Senate from 2014 through 2018, but as you mentioned, we've been shut out since then. So I think now we have an opportunity to speak to voters on these issues that they care about and to have the voters consider our positions on them. President Biden is very unpopular in this state, and the voters associate the state level Democrats, as they should, with President Biden's policies. Take energy, for instance. In 2019, the Democrats passed and our Democratic governor signed into law a bill that really crippled oil and gas operations in the state. Senate Bill 181, creating setbacks that were just untenable for the industry, destroying the industry in the state, which now, given the situation in Russia, all of a sudden is being seen as the terrible decision that it was. Now, it's sad to say that the condition of the state is terrible. Homelessness is a major and growing problem. We have some of the worst violent crime statistics in the country, if not the worst in the country, with major spikes. And this has all happened under Democrat control. Now, unlike John, we don't control one chamber now and are vying for control of a second. We control neither, and we're aspiring to a position where we can play defense, which we certainly will be able to do to great effect if we can take back the state Senate and stop some of these terrible bills that these Democrats are pushing through year after year.
So you mentioned some of the negative effects that have come from these, bad policy decisions from the Democrats. How do you think that would change if Republicans controlled the Colorado House and Senate?
If we controlled Colorado House and Senate, even with a Democratic governor, Jared Polis, who at the moment is favored to win re-election in November, I think that we would see him tack to the right and work with the Republicans in a way that he hasn't had the opportunity to do as the Democrats have controlled everything. I think that if we controlled House and Senate, we would see the governor get on board with some of our initiatives. He already bucks his party in certain regards. For instance, he's come out in favor of zero state income tax in Colorado, and caught a lot of blowback and flack from his own party for that position. But he didn't seem to care about that flack, and I think he would get on board with some of our ideas if we controlled both chambers. And finally, I'll say that while the state Senate is obviously closer than the state House in Colorado, riper for the picking for us Republicans, it is not out of the question that we take the state House too. If we actually see the red tsunami that seems to be headed our way right now, both chambers are in play.
That's the kind of content that we like to see. So what do you guys think are the top 3 issues that are going to be top of mind for voters come November that candidates should really be focusing on and that your organizations are going to be driving toward?
So I think this is a really interesting time to be working with working in politics, working on the center right and the right, and if I had one piece of advice to all of our candidates, it's message discipline this cycle, right? There's a million things flying a million different miles around, and it seems like we're playing whack-a-mole with crisis to crisis to crisis coming up under the Biden administration and their failures. And what we're seeing consistently is that voters are concerned, first and foremost, with economy and jobs. And I would put the economy and jobs kind of in that broad category. Things like inflation are included in their supply chain issues. It can spin off in a whole bunch of different ways and keep it relevant for whatever's going on. In Minnesota, voters are absolutely concerned about violent crime. We are ground zero for where the Democrats pledged to defund the police. In Minneapolis, we have Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who has been out there repeatedly saying defund the police, even as the Democrats try and move off that failed message. The liberal Democrats in Minneapolis rejected a charter amendment to get rid of the Minneapolis Police Department, but not before Democrats across the state came out in favor of that. So we're seeing the disastrous consequences of that with sharp spikes and increases in crime. Specifically violent crime, right? That's what we're seeing here. And it's really crippling our downtown economy. And then the third one would be education. This is a issue that Republicans in Minnesota haven't really had the opportunity to compete on a whole bunch in the past. We're a little bit different from some other states, places like Colorado, where they've got some more choice and kind of a cultural shift towards that direction. And what we've seen is that our students aren't okay, right? After 18 months of lockdowns, kids being forced to wear masks at home and delay their speech, their learning falling off a cliff, test scores down across the board. We have one of, if not the worst, achievement gaps and opportunity gaps for our students of color who live in Minneapolis. And it's really a tragedy, right? It's a failing of the government. One of the things that our government is supposed to do is make sure that kids have an opportunity to get an education, make sure that parents are involved in those educational decisions. We have thrown more and more and more money at the problem. It's driven by the teachers union, who are out there demanding right now in Minneapolis. The teachers union's on strike. They're demanding 20% raises this year before they'll go back into a classroom and do their jobs to teach our kids. Our kids can't read at grade level. They can't do math at grade level, but they want a 20% raise in the midst of this, economic downturn. And we need to be out there and talking about that. We can have those conversations about empowering parents, about the fact that we need some real reforms so that we can get real results, and that pouring money on this problem just doesn't solve it. So I would say economy and jobs, crime being up, and public safety. We've got to keep our communities safe. And it's education. It's 3 things that state government should do, that state government can do, and that the Democrats in Minnesota have failed to do.
Daniel, what kind of things are you seeing? Similar, different?
More than similar, actually the exact same. Last year, a coalition of Republican and conservative organizations came together to draft what we called the Republican Commitment to Colorado. Led by a really fantastic state chair, Christy Burton Brown, we formulated a program for the 2022 elections, articulating our pledge to the people, what we're going to focus on if we get elected. And the whole document contains 10 points, but the top 3 we call the big 3, and our messaging, both on the hard side and the soft side, has revolved around these big 3, without coordination, of course. And the big 3 are cost of living or affordability, in other words, economy and jobs, as John said, public safety, and expanding educational choice. These are the 3 issues that voters in Colorado care about. Cost of living is obviously a pressing issue. When we announced this Republican commitment to Colorado, we did it at a gas station several months ago, at a gas station in Denver. And the Denver media, which is, with exceptions, thankfully, but by and large in the tank for the Democrats in the state, of course, mocked us and ridiculed us for holding a press conference at a gas station on a day when the air quality was especially bad because of the fires in California blowing smoke into our state. But with every day that passes, our choice of pointing at gas prices seems more prescient and all the more relevant. So cost of living is a big issue. As I mentioned previously, public safety is especially resonant in Colorado, with crime spiking and visible symptoms of it on the street. And finally, educational choice is a big issue. Parents in Colorado, just as parents in Virginia, believe rightly that they should have a say in their children's education. And that belief has manifested itself in some policy that Republicans are putting forward that, of course, Democrats are blocking. For instance, Representative Tim Geithner in the House has put forward this session a curriculum transparency bill, which would require every school district to post their school's curricula for parents' review. Democrats don't think that parents should be able to see that curricula. And of course, it's true in Colorado, as it is across the country, that reading, writing, and math scores are in the basement. And that has been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. There's a good article actually in the New York Times, of all places, this morning about how kids are behind in reading. But even before the pandemic, reading, writing, and math scores were not good. I think parents are recognizing that schools are not doing as good of a job as they should educating our children, which doesn't mean that, that's not to denigrate teachers. There are a lot of great teachers out there that are doing the best with what they have. But what they have is less than what they could have if these school districts weren't spending so much on overhead and administration instead of putting dollars in the classroom. So education is a big one as well. We have the same big three in Colorado and Minnesota.
I think those are probably issues that are going to be prevalent across the entire country. So we conducted polling earlier this year, and it showed that Joe Biden is dragging down state legislative Democratic state legislators. There we go. I was like, that's wrong. How are you going to be able to use that to your advantage in the coming months before the elections in November?
I think whenever we look at those results and other things that we've seen, there's some encouraging results in there if you're a Republican looking towards November. There was a point in the survey that y'all did in Minnesota that found that the generic ballot was 4 points towards Republicans. When we expanded our majority in 2016, we were down 1 on the generic ballot in Minnesota. We absolutely are in an environment where the Democrats' brand is becoming toxic. And sure, part of it is Biden, but it's the issues that all of these Democrats, whether they're at the state level, where it's the House Democrats here, the Senate Democrats here, Governor Walz, President Biden, they're all aligned on the wrong side of a lot of these issues. And I think there's buyer's remorse. And that's really where we're going to be able to make that connection, I think, for voters, is just finishing tying that together, right? This is not about the fact that, this person can be a check on Joe Biden or that you're taking out your anger on Joe Biden. It's that everything that you don't like about Joe Biden and the policies that he's pushing, the Minnesota Democrats have a policy that's just as extreme and just as failed, if not more so. So it's really linking them together through things that they're already seeing, they're already hearing, and finding a way to tie it back locally. One of the things that we really stress is that all elections, for lack of a better term, are local, especially when we're talking about state legislative races. How do we bring this down to your community? How do we talk about your school, your teachers, your taxes, and really finding a way to personalize it? But I think the biggest thing that we have going for us is that the Democrats are marching in tune right off that same cliff.
That was well said, John. And Biden and Colorado Democrats have the same policies, which now more and more every day people are seeing to be destructive. I mentioned oil and gas earlier. It really can't be overstated because in Colorado, the Democrats until recently have made a point of branding themselves as the anti-oil and gas party. Colorado, if we explored oil and gas the way we could create supplies that would significantly alleviate the problem we have with Russian oil and gas. But we're not exploring because Democrats have shut that down in the same way that Joe Biden during his campaign said we're going to end fossil fuels in the United States. So it's not simply a marketing trick to say that Colorado Democrats and Joe Biden are essentially one and the same. It is the truth. They have the same policies that are hurting people in the exact same ways, and we need to simply articulate that fact to the voters because the voters are smart and they're going to see that.
In Colorado and Minnesota both, there's some pretty high-profile top-of-ticket races that are happening this year. How do you think that's going to impact these down-ballot races that you guys are working with?
Go for it, Daniel.
So Jared Polis is the governor of Colorado, Democratic governor, running for re-election. Most polls have him ahead, or all polls have him ahead. But Colorado voters have proven in the past to be ticket splitters. And so even if Polis does end up winning the election here, his winning doesn't mean that Republicans aren't going to win elsewhere. As I mentioned earlier, from 2014 to 2018, Republicans controlled the state Senate while Democrats controlled the state House and the governor's mansion. So I don't think that the effect is going to be great. In the attorney general's race, we have a stellar candidate in the person of John Kellner and other constitutional offices too. We have candidates running who are expected to win. So up high on the ticket, it's a mixed bag of races that from the current vantage appear to suggest that Democrats will win some, Republicans win others. But in the legislative races, Republicans are going to fare very well. As I said, voters have demonstrated that they can vote Democrat in one race, Republican in another.
Yeah, and Minnesota, similar to what Daniel mentioned about Colorado, Minnesotans have shown that they also are willing to be split ticket voters. Minnesota we hold the unfortunate distinction of being the only state that hasn't voted for a Republican since Nixon. We haven't elected a Republican statewide since 2006. But we have some exciting races this year, and that's driven by candidate quality. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. We have our endorsement for those statewide races coming up in May. And then if necessary, we'll have a primary in August. But we're going to run our campaigns at the legislative level. And we're going to work to make sure that we're talking to voters regardless of who they are, right? We were able to gain seats in 2020, even as President Trump's margin of defeat expanded in Minnesota, because we were willing to go talk to those voters, right? The suburban Republican who wasn't a huge fan of President Trump's, but was willing to hear about a conservative message. I think a lot of times the Democrats have made the mistake of assuming that those are new Democrats and that they weren't anti-Trump voters. And we're going to have those conversations. But interestingly, because of redistricting in Minnesota, I think we'll actually probably have less going on than we're used to operating an environment around, because we lost a couple of previously competitive congressional districts. We had 3 or 4 competitive congressional races each of the last few cycles, which just dumped massive amounts of money into our state. The vast majority of our state is covered by one media market. It gets incredibly expensive to run our ads, to find ways to be nimble with a legislative type budget. And we're down to 1, maybe 2 competitive congressional races, with the others getting a little bit safer for the party that controls them. So it ended up working out, in a fair manner. but probably means that we have a little bit less going on than we normally do, even though our gubernatorial race is certainly looking like it'll be more competitive than we're used to in recent history.
Okay, so this is my last question. Ahead of the elections, what do you think that voters need to know to be able to make a decision that is good for them, good for their families, good for their communities?
I think voters in Colorado need to hear clearly from our candidates what their positions are on kitchen table issues. Voters care about their pocketbook. They care about their kids' education. They care about the safety of their families and their communities. And our candidates need to come across as sober-minded, serious, policy-oriented, aspiring statesmen who want to get into office in order to enact policy that will make a serious, significant difference for voters. In 2020, Senate Republicans in Colorado performed better than expectations. Colorado Democrats thought they were going to win 4 state Senate seats. We held them to 1, and it was one that we recognized early on we weren't going to be able to win. And in the others, our candidates won precisely because they could point to a track record of policy positions that would make a real difference in the lives of their constituents, and their constituents responded favorably to that. Our candidates this year, likewise, need to communicate their serious positions to improve the lives of the people that they aspire to lead.
You know, as we look towards November and start to think about what that looks like, I think we have a great opportunity in Minnesota to do a couple of things. First and foremost is introduce our candidates. The House caucus, the Senate caucus have spent a lot of time recruiting really great candidates this cycle, candidates who are reflective of the districts that they want to serve, who have diverse and varied backgrounds, whether it's in the public sector, the private sector. We've got a lot of veterans and healthcare personnel who are running, small business owners across the board. It's really a recruitment boon. And thank you to President Biden for that and encouraging folks to get off the bench, get involved. But an opportunity to introduce the voters to those great candidates. And then we're going to take the opportunity to remind voters that these Democrats have been in office longer than this legislative session, because I think the Democrats probably saw similar to polling to what we've seen. And it's amazing how quickly they have changed their tone. They went from proposing that 25 cents of a gallon of new gas taxes that would cost billions of dollars to Minnesotans to suggesting that maybe we get rid of the gas tax from May until Labor Day of an election year. You've got our governor who's suggesting that we ought to use some of that surplus money to send out what he called Walls checks. You know, he's talking about putting his name on the people's money and trying to send it back to them and tell them it's a present when the state has already overtaxed them. So we're going to go back and we're going to look through what they've actually done, not what they've said that they want to do in an election year. And we're going to hold them accountable for all of those bad votes and bad policies and allow our candidates to get out, introduce themselves, and share that optimistic vision for what they see for the future of Minnesota.
Annie, if I could add one thing to my answer, inspired by something John just said. He reminded me that every day I have a conversation with a potential investor or a voter or a colleague in Colorado where the quality of the Colorado State Senate Republican roster this election comes up. We have rock stars, all stars in every single battleground state district in Colorado. Really, really strong candidates. In a couple of the races, 2 strong candidates who are vying against each other in a primary where we think, hey, whoever comes out of this primary on top is going to absolutely slay in the general election. Where we do have primaries, our candidates have agreed publicly to keep the primaries clean, to focus on issues and policy, which is only going to bolster the brand. So we are super excited in Colorado for the quality of our candidates, and we look forward to seeing them take it to the Democrats this November.
That's awesome. I think this is going to be a good year, and we're excited to be partnering with such good people, such good organizations on the ground that are doing the kind of work that you guys are doing. And I definitely appreciate you guys making the time to hop on here today. I know you're both very busy, and there's always something to be doing and something to be done. So just wanted to thank you guys for coming on here, and thank you everybody also for listening and for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform that you're listening on, and always remember that state politics have an impact that's bigger than you think.